Oh God, have you forsaken me? Forsaken me, forsaken me. Oh God, have you forsaken me? Forsaken me.
Welcome to Aurelia Community Church. Today is Good Friday, and this Good Friday online experience is a series of videos, a short reflection, some songs, just enabling us to spend some time reflecting on, meditating on, thinking about the cross. My name is Michael Bells. I'm pastor here at Aurelia Community Church, OCC, and we're glad that you've joined us. One of the temptations that many Christians face is that we want to rush through Good Friday and get right to Easter Sunday. And I understand that. We want to celebrate. The resurrection is worth celebrating. There's no doubt about it. But we need to sit. We need to reflect. We need to know something more of the cross and what Jesus experienced. And I invite you to sit, to reflect, to meditate, to bask in all that Jesus went through.
The king is dead. The hand that once held a branch now gripped a hammer. The king is dead. This King of Kings who embraced the very nature of a servant. This Prince of Peace, broken for us. This Commander of Angels, surrendered to a cross. This King joins us in our suffering, empathizes in our weakness, and he calls us to die with him, to lay down our lives, to live in surrender, that we may be fully alive. The King is dead. Long live the King.
Good Friday. Good Friday and suffering. I feel like I'm the wrong person to talk about suffering. I'm a privileged, white, middle-class male with a couple of master's degrees. And yet whenever I hear about new tragedies, yes, it pulls at our heart, pulls at my heart. I grieve with Ukraine and Yemen and Afghanistan and northern Ethiopia and things closer to home in terms of accidents and tragedies and illnesses. I'm reminded that wherever suffering I've experienced, and I've experienced very little, it doesn't reach the level of sorrow of my neighbors. Sometimes we look around and we know we've got physical ailments. Other times, it's a diagnosis you didn't want to hear from the doctor. Other times it's depression. That interior suffering that you've struggled with and against for an awful long time. Or anxiety or fears. On your good days, you live what many would call a, quote, normal life with good friendships and a loving family. On those darker days, you feel all alone. As if you're moving through a fog, a heavy fog. And some of you know that all too well. Maybe you've had that, and some of you have had that depression flip into a manic episode. And with the help of medication and some close, loving, caring friends, that depression has lifted considerably. But there's still dark days when the darkness, when the fear is palpable. And you wonder, will the mania be triggered again? Maybe that's not your experience, but you have friends or family who have that. Or there's other areas of suffering. There's darkness, there's dementia, there's thorns in the flesh that never quite heal. And I know that the more we share those experiences with one another, the stronger our relationships will be, the sturdier our hope. Theologian Douglas John Hall wrote in his book, God and Human Suffering, to find oneself befriended in one's suffering is not only a more believable answer to the pain of suffering, it is also more profound. The only satisfying answer is the answer given to Job, the answer that is no answer, but the presence of an answerer. That's what the good news is rooted in. Not simplistic answers, simplistic paint things over, but the presence of an answerer. The presence of the one who experienced rejection and pain and death. That kind of companionship through the dark night of the soul is what we all need, and yet sadly is often lacking, and churches seem so incapable of providing. Too often, I see Christians using hope as a veil to cover up anxieties and to avoid suffering. We sing praise songs with strummy crescendos and major chords, and we spin the wheel of theology looking for answers to evil, and we emphasize the saving benefits of the cross. And we lose sight of the violence and the ugliness. We want to avoid pain. We don't want to sit in the disappointments, and the result is we often have little to offer people, even in our own midst, and certainly people in our community who are suffering. This is why Good Friday is a gift. We both need it and we're afraid to accept it. On Good Friday, Jesus himself experiences forsakenness and suffering that rends his body and threatens his trust with God. And yet he prays. He prays for the people executing him. He loves the thieves hanging on the cross beside him. Where does that kind of love come from? How do we cultivate within our own hearts space that is as wide as Christ's wounds? That kind of expansive and ragged space where our suffering is transfigured into love. When we stay with Good Friday, the cross becomes an icon of suffering, a bedrock example of Jesus' love. If we stay here and resist the temptation just to jump ahead to the empty tomb, Jesus can teach us the meaning of suffering well and the deep truth that regardless of the pain we carry, we are not alone. If we stay here, the cross can burn away our delusions and our avoidance of pain until we can join with Jesus in praying, Father, into your hands I commit my spirit. We're called to live in this tension between Good Friday and Easter Sunday. In the Gospels, the starkest example of the struggle to overcome fear and to trust in God in extreme affliction is Jesus' agony in Gethsemane. You know the gospel account. Before he was apprehended and handed over to the Romans to be crucified, Jesus took his disciples out to a garden at the foothills of Mount of Olives. He knew he was going to be arrested. He knew he was going to be tortured and killed. He knew that the hour of the power of darkness, as Dr. Luke records it, was about to strike. And in that moment, he sought solace and strength and courage in prayer. Jesus was afraid. It says in Mark's gospel, he was distressed and agitated, deeply grieved, even unto death. And he threw himself on the ground and he prayed, Abba, Father, with you all things are possible. Remove this cup from me. Yet not what I want, but what you want. And wanting support, wanting those to come around him in his pain, Jesus asked his disciples to remain close to him and keep awake. But they fell asleep. They left Jesus alone in his agony. They didn't have any explanation. They couldn't explain why. But Dr. Luke, a medical doctor, in his gospel says they fell asleep because of the grief, because of their sorrow mixed with fear. 3 times Jesus prayed. 3 times the disciples fell asleep. 3 times Jesus did not get the answer he wanted from God. Still, he finished his prayer transformed. After his 3rd failed request to God and to remove the cup of suffering and pain and death on the cross from him, he came to his disciples and woke them up and said, "Get up, let's get going." Going where? Well, it was going into darkness, going into suffering, going into death. Let us be going does not necessarily imply that all the fear was gone. What it makes clear is that the power of fear had been broken. After the prayer, Jesus got up victorious from the experience of being engulfed by fear and almost lost to fear. He still had to go through extreme suffering. He still had to listen to the mocking of his enemies. He still had to experience God's silence and feel that God had abandoned him. He still had to die. But his victory over fear in Gethsemane was a little resurrection before the crucifixion. It made him able to walk into suffering and death with the dignity of one who was afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair. Victory over the fear of suffering, victory over the fear of death, anticipated the victory over suffering and death themselves that came on Easter morning when Jesus was raised into God's glory. It's a deep, deep theological and spiritual insight that Christ's fear releases us from our fear. That's been the comforting experience of many believers, many suffering Christians over the last 2,000 years. But we need to say more. We need to say also that Jesus' fear can release us from fear because, in fact, he conquered fear. We can conquer the fear of fear, the power of fear, as Jesus conquered the power of fear. We can conquer the power of death as Jesus conquered the power of death. How does that happen? We conquer fear by entrusting our lives to God, to the God who promises to give us the kingdom. We conquer the fear of death through the hope that we will be raised into glory by the power of the same Spirit that raised Jesus Christ from the dead. And over the next few minutes, I trust and pray that you would rest in that and soak in that and reflect on that and meditate on those promises that God makes to you and to me through the cross. Amen.
The cross. It was meant to horrify the world. It was meant for humiliation. It was meant to last for days. It was meant for slow asphyxiation. It was meant to prolong torture. It was the Roman soldier's job. It was meant to be used by Caesar, but instead, it was used by God. It was meant to stop a movement, but instead, it became the way. It was meant to act on fear, but instead, it awakened faith. It was meant to be vicious and violent, but instead, it became our peace. It was meant to uproot hope, but instead, it became the seed. It was meant to punish captives, but instead, it unleashed freedom. It was meant to build up Rome, but instead, it built God's kingdom. It was meant to discourage rebels. It was meant to stop insurrection. It was meant to put down Jesus, but instead, it set up his resurrection. It was meant to jeer and mock him, but instead it was his glory. It was meant to erase a chapter, but instead it became the story. It was meant to hold up convicts, but instead it raised up a king. It was meant to shut our mouth, but instead it's why we sing. It was meant to be a judgment, but instead it became our mercy. It's why the song of heaven is the Lamb is worthy. It was meant to kill an enemy, crush dissenters and diversion, but instead it became the banner of God's love for every person. It was meant to be appalling, nailing hands and feet to wood. It was meant to be used for evil, but instead it was used for good. It was meant to be a symbol of God's assassination, but instead, it became the symbol of Jesus' invitation. Come to the cross. Instead of sin and stain, you are meant to be made clean. Instead of being forgotten, you are meant to know you're seen. Instead of being ashamed, you can leave behind your guilt. Instead of feeling empty, you were meant to be fulfilled. Instead of being broken, you are meant to be made whole. Here, Calvary is calling. It beckons you. Behold, come to the cross. Instead of being an accident, you have a purpose and a plan. Instead of being abandoned, you were chosen by his hand. For all who've said I can't, God has said I can. No matter what you've done, the invitation stands. Come to the cross. Instead of being doubtful, you are meant to know your Father. You are meant to be his son, and you are meant to be his daughter. You were cherished from the start. You were always in the picture. Instead of being a victim, you were meant to be a victor. The result of Jesus' blood, salvation has arrived. Instead of being dead, you are meant to be alive. The cross. It was meant to signal death, but instead, it's a sign of living. It was meant to be the end, but instead, it's our beginning.
There's a place where mercy reigns and never dies. There's a place where streams of grace flow deep and wide, where all the love I've ever found comes like a flood, comes flowing down. At the cross, I surrender my life. I'm in awe of you. I'm in awe of you. Where your love ran red and my sin washed white. I owe to you. I owe to you, Jesus. to you I owe. Here my hope is found, here on holy ground. Here I bow down, here I bow down. Here, arms open wide, here you saved my life. Here I bow. You see where your love and my sin washed. I owe at the cross, I surrender. I'm in awe of you, where your love ran red, my sin washed white. I owe to you, Jesus. Jesus.
You need not say goodbye. The people will shout my name. Pilate will tell them there's nothing I've done to deserve this, but they will refuse. Pilate will stand me beside Barabbas, a murderer, and they will choose him over me. Pilate will appeal to the priest, insist on simply whipping me to appease their fury, but they will shout it louder, crucify, crucify. But still, you need not say goodbye. My hands will be tied to a post. The sound of the whip will ring in your ears and in your chest. The soldiers will peel the skin off my back. A ring of thorny branches will be pressed into my scalp until the blood runs into my eyes. Oh, but listen. You need not say goodbye. I will carry that cross. I will go to the place of the skull, and there they will drive the iron stakes between the bones in my wrist. With a hammer, they will nail my feet into the tree. I will be raised up as the world waits for me to die. Nevertheless, you need not say goodbye. Between two thieves I will hang. You may hear me speaking to my Father, your Father. You may hear me ask him, why? But child, you need not say goodbye. What you won't see, what you won't hear, what you won't know until all of this is done, is that in that moment, I was paying the penalty of your wrongdoing, every mistake, Every act of envy, every word of hatred, every moment of violence and greed and spite, every selfish desire, every lustful thought, every moment of weakness and weariness, all the failures of human history will be in my hands and on my head. On that cross, I will suffer the wrath that was destined for you. Every guilty verdict fallen on me. Your punishment will be paid for in my blood, and it will be enough. I will die on your cross. I will let out a final sigh. Know that I have loved you, and you need not say goodbye. But if you must, if you absolutely must say the word goodbye, then say it like this. Goodbye, fear. Goodbye, sorrow. Goodbye, rejection. Goodbye, shame. Say it like this. Goodbye, guilt. Goodbye, condemnation. Goodbye, all the regrets of the past. Look up at the cross and speak the words. Goodbye, addiction. Goodbye, chains. Goodbye, hopelessness. Right here in this place, say it aloud. Goodbye, captivity. Hello, freedom. Goodbye, loneliness. Hello, belonging. Goodbye, defeat. Hello, victory. This is the end of the curse. This is the demise of the serpent. This is all debts paid. It is finished. Goodbye all the powers of hell. Goodbye darkness. Goodbye dread. Goodbye every sin. Go ahead and say it. Goodbye death. Speak and be free, but don't say goodbye to me. Yes, you'll see them put the spear in my side, but remember, it's only Friday, so you need not say goodbye.